The cheap fabric of my dress tore with a sound like ripping paper, a sound that seemed to slice through the polite chatter of the grand ballroom. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, quickly followed by a wave of cruel, sharp laughter. I stumbled backward, the force of my mother-in-law's shove sending me sprawling onto the cold, unforgiving marble floor. Red wine, the contents of the glass she had thrown in my face, dripped from my hair onto my exposed skin, mingling with my tears. My dignity was scattered like shattered glass around me. They had no idea. As they stood over me, faces twisted in scorn and triumph, they were blissfully, fatally ignorant. They saw a poor, nameless girl who had somehow tricked their golden son into marriage. They saw a charity case, a stain on their perfect family portrait. They did not see the truth. They had no idea who my father was. You have to stay with me. You have to listen to the very end, because what happened in the next hour would leave every single person in that room speechless. It was a reckoning they never saw coming. But to understand how we got there, to that moment of absolute degradation, I need to take you back to where it all began. My name is Mia, and for 2 years, I chose to live a lie. It was a lie born not of deceit, but of a desperate hope. My father is Robert Sterling. If you do not know the name, you know the companies he built from the ground up. Sterling Industries is a global behemoth, a name synonymous with power and unimaginable wealth. I grew up in a world of private jets, sprawling estates, and suffocating expectations. I had everything a person could ever want, except the one thing I craved, to be seen, to be valued for myself, for Mia, not for the Sterling name attached to me. I was tired of the fortune hunters, the sycophants, the men whose eyes glazed over with dollar signs when they learned who my father was. So I made a decision. I left that world behind. I took a small apartment downtown, got a job at an art gallery, and told everyone I was an orphan who lived off a modest trust fund. I wanted to find a love that was real, untainted by the gleam of gold. That was when I met Leo. He was a junior investment banker, handsome, charming, with an ambition that I found attractive. He came into the gallery one afternoon, and he looked at the paintings with a genuine curiosity, and then he looked at me. He saw me. He asked me about my passions, my dreams, my fears. He never once asked about my family or my finances. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was enough, just as I was. We fell in love, or so I believed. When he proposed a year later, my heart soared. I told my father, who was skeptical but supportive. He had his investigators run a thorough background check on Leo and his family, the Mortons. They were wealthy, but in the way a small hill is wealthy next to a mountain. They had old money, a respectable name in the city, but they were leagues below the Sterling stratosphere. My father warned me. They're obsessed with status, Mia. Be careful, I assured him I would be. I thought love could conquer anything. I was so naive. The moment I met Leo's family, I felt a chill. His mother, Eleanor, greeted me with a smile that was all teeth, sharp as glass. Her eyes scanned my simple, off-the-rack dress with a look of barely concealed disgust. Her perfume was strong, sweet, and suffocating. "Leo, darling, you didn't tell us she was so quaint," she said, the word hanging in the air like a poison dart. His father, Richard, a stern man with a permanent frown etched on his face, barely acknowledged me with a stiff nod before turning his attention back to his newspaper. He was a man who measured worth in stock prices and pedigrees, and I clearly registered as a 0 in both categories. Then there was Chloe, Leo's younger sister. She was a carbon copy of her mother, but with a more modern, vicious edge. She looked me up and down, a smirk playing on her lips. "So you're the one who's captured my brother's heart," she purred, her tone dripping with insincerity. We were all so curious. It's lovely that Leo is doing some charity work. I tried to laugh it off, to be gracious. I told myself it was just their way, that they needed time to get to know me. But it never got better. It only got worse. The 2 years of my marriage to Leo were a masterclass in subtle cruelty and overt disdain. At family dinners, I was seated at the far end of the table, often ignored entirely. They would speak in French, a language they knew I did not understand, laughing among themselves and occasionally glancing my way. Eleanor constantly offered me her old clothes, saying things like, "You simply must let me help you, dear. It's not your fault you don't understand quality." Chloe would accidentally spill wine on my dresses, always the few nice ones I owned, apologizing with a saccharine sweetness that was more insulting than the act itself. They called me Leo's little project, his exotic choice. Through it all, I looked to Leo for support, for defense. But none ever came. He was a coward, a man trapped between the woman he claimed to love and the family whose approval he desperately craved. When I would cry to him at night, telling him about the latest slight, the newest barb, he would sigh with weary frustration. "Mia, you're being too sensitive," he would say. "That's just how they are. They're from a different world." "But it's cruel, Leo," I would plead. "They make me feel worthless." "Just try harder to fit in," was his constant refrain. "Wear the clothes Eleanor gives you. Laugh at their jokes. Don't make waves." He did not see that I was not the one making waves. I was the one drowning in them. He was asking me to erase myself, to become a pale imitation of the people who despised me, just to keep the peace. And like a fool, I tried. For him. For us. I held my tongue, absorbed the insults, and smiled until my cheeks ached, hoping that one day they would finally see me. That day never came. Instead, the day of their 50th anniversary gala arrived. It was the social event of the season, held at their palatial estate. The theme was opulence, and I knew my simple wardrobe would not suffice. Leo, in a rare moment of consideration, gave me a credit card and told me to buy something beautiful. I found a simple, elegant black gown. It was understated, but it made me feel confident. When I came downstairs, ready to go, the Morton family was waiting. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she took in my dress. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice laced with disappointment. "I suppose it will have to do. One can only expect so much." The gala was a blur of champagne, fake smiles, and condescending glances. I felt like an exhibit in a zoo, the strange creature Leo had brought home. I tried to stay by his side, but he was constantly pulled away by his parents to mingle with people they deemed important. I was left alone, adrift in a sea of silks and diamonds. That was when Chloe approached me, a predatory gleam in her eye. "Mia, Mother has been looking for you. She wants to show you something in her dressing room." A knot of dread tightened in my stomach, but I followed her upstairs, away from the noise of the party. Eleanor was standing before her vanity, a velvet box open in her hands. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was the most magnificent sapphire necklace I had ever seen. It was a cascade of deep blue stones, surrounded by a constellation of diamonds. "The Morton sapphire," Eleanor said, her voice filled with reverence. "It has been in our family for 5 generations. It is priceless." She looked at me, her gaze cold and assessing. "One day, it will be Chloe's. It goes to a true Morton woman." The implication was clear. I was not, and never would be, one of them. Later that evening, the whispers started. I noticed people looking at me, pointing, their faces a mixture of pity and scorn. I found Leo and asked him what was wrong. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room. "It's nothing, Mia. Just a misunderstanding." But it was not nothing. A few minutes later, the music stopped. Richard Morton stood on the grand staircase, a microphone in his hand. His face was grim. "May I have your attention, please?" he announced. "I'm afraid something unfortunate has occurred. My wife's necklace, the Morton sapphire, has gone missing from her dressing room." A wave of shocked murmurs went through the crowd. Then, Eleanor's voice, high and shrill, cut through the noise. She was pointing directly at me. It was her. I saw her looking at it. She was the only one alone with me in the room. All heads turned to me. Hundreds of pairs of eyes, burning with accusation. I felt the blood drain from my face. "No," I whispered. "That's not true." Chloe stepped forward, the picture of feigned concern. "Mia, darling, if you need money, you only had to ask. We would have helped you. There's no need to resort to stealing." The words hit me like stones. The crowd began to close in, their faces morphing into a gallery of contempt. They were snakes in expensive clothes, ready to strike. I looked desperately for Leo, my anchor, my husband. I found him standing beside his father, his face pale and conflicted. Our eyes met across the room. I silently begged him, pleaded with him to stand by me, to defend me. "Leo," I said, my voice trembling. Tell them. Tell them I would never." He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked from me to his mother, his face a mask of weakness. He took a small step backward, away from me, and that single step was a deeper betrayal than any accusation. That was all the encouragement Eleanor needed. She strode toward me, her face a mask of righteous fury. "Where is it, you little thief? Did you think you could get away with this? Did you think you could steal from us?" "I didn't take it," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "I swear." "Liar," she shrieked. She grabbed my small evening bag from my shoulder and emptied its contents onto the floor. A lipstick, my phone, a compact mirror. No necklace. For a moment, there was a flicker of uncertainty in the crowd. But Eleanor was committed. Her eyes were wild. She must have hidden it on her person. She's wearing that cheap, baggy dress to conceal it. Before I could react, she lunged at me. Her manicured hands grabbed the neckline of my gown. She pulled. The sound of the fabric tearing was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was a violent, definitive sound that echoed the breaking of my heart. The dress ripped open down to my waist, exposing my slip and my skin to the entire room. The gasps were immediate, sharp intakes of breath from every corner of the ballroom. And then came the laughter. It started as a snicker from Chloe, who had her phone out, recording everything. Then it spread, a wave of cruel, derisive laughter that washed over me, drowning me. They were laughing at my humiliation, at my pain. Eleanor was not finished. Her face was contorted with rage. "Get out of my house," she screamed, and she shoved me hard in the chest. I lost my balance, stumbling backward, my heels catching on the slick floor. I fell. I landed hard on the cold marble, the impact jarring my bones. I lay there, exposed and broken, as the laughter rained down on me. I looked up one last time at my husband. My Leo. His face was ashen. He watched me on the floor, watched his mother preen with victory, watched his sister film my degradation. And he did nothing. He stood there, frozen in his cowardice. Then he did something worse than nothing. He turned his back on me. That was the end. The love I thought we had, the life I had tried so hard to build, it all evaporated in that single, soul-crushing moment. 2 burly security guards, hired for the party, moved toward me. They grabbed my upper arms, their grips painfully tight, and hauled me to my feet. They did not care that my dress was torn, that I was barely covered. They dragged me through the jeering crowd, a spectacle of shame. The grand doors were pulled open, and I was thrown out into the night, landing on the cold, damp pavement of the driveway. The doors slammed shut behind me, cutting off the sound of the laughter, but not its echo in my soul. I sat there on the curb, shivering, the cool night air a brutal shock against my skin. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone. A car pulled up to the valet stand, and a young man in a red uniform vest got out. He saw me, his eyes widening with pity. He looked back at the grand house, then at me. Without a word, he took off his uniform jacket and walked over. He gently draped it over my shoulders, a small, profound act of kindness in a world that had just shown me its absolute cruelty. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice soft. I could not speak. I just nodded, clutching the jacket around me. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and decency. It was the warmest thing I had felt all night. In my purse, which they had thrown out after me, my phone buzzed. It was Leo. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. He could not defend me, but now he wanted to talk. The irony was a bitter pill. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely unlock it. I scrolled past Leo's name, past the few friends I had made in this city who were likely inside, laughing with the rest of them. I went to my favorites. There was only one number there. A direct line that bypassed assistants and secretaries. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Mia? What is it?" "It's late," his voice was calm, steady. the voice that had soothed my childhood nightmares. My own voice was a broken whisper, choked with sobs. "Dad," I managed to say. "Dad, I need you." The calm in his voice vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. "What's wrong? Where are you? Talk to me, honey." Through ragged breaths and hiccuping sobs, I told him everything. I told him about the years of insults, about Leo's cowardice, about the missing necklace, the torn dress, being thrown out onto the street. I told him I was sitting on the curb outside the Morton estate. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was different. It was a voice I had not heard in years, not since a rival corporation had attempted a hostile takeover. It was cold. It was controlled. It was the sound of absolute, methodical fury. "Stay right where you are," he said, his words clipped and precise. "Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. I am coming." He hung up. I sat there, clutching the valet's jacket, the world a blurry watercolor painting through my tears. Less than 10 minutes passed. Then I heard it. A low, rhythmic thumping in the distance, growing steadily louder. It was not the sound of a car. It was the sound of helicopter blades cutting through the night air. I looked up. One searchlight, then another, then a third, pierced the darkness, converging on the Morton estate. 3 black helicopters, sleek and menacing like birds of prey, descended onto the vast, manicured great lawn, their downdraft whipping the trees into a frenzy. At the same exact moment, a squeal of tires echoed from the main road. A motorcade of 6 black SUVs, the kind used by heads of state, turned into the long driveway and screeched to a halt in front of the mansion, blocking the exit. Doors flew open, and a dozen men in dark, impeccably tailored suits and earpieces emerged, moving with a disciplined, intimidating purpose. The grand doors of the ballroom were thrown open with such force that they slammed against the interior walls. The chatter and music inside died instantly. In the doorway, silhouetted against the night, stood my father, Robert Sterling. He was flanked by 2 of his top lawyers and his head of security. He was not a tall man, but in that moment, he seemed to fill the entire space, his presence an immovable object of pure power. The air in the room became thick, heavy with dread. He scanned the room, his eyes like chips of granite. They found me, huddled by the door where a kind-faced assistant was now wrapping me in a thick cashmere coat. The fury in his gaze intensified, becoming a white-hot flame. He strode into the center of the ballroom, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. The guests parted before him like water. He stopped, his gaze sweeping over the sea of stunned, frightened faces. He finally let his eyes land on Richard and Eleanor Morton. His voice, when he spoke, was not a shout. It was far more terrifying. It was a low, resonant boom that filled every corner of the room and rattled the crystal chandeliers. "My daughter was just thrown out of this party," he declared, his voice dangerously calm. "Which one of you touched her?" No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was absolute. Eleanor, recovering from her initial shock, puffed up with indignation. "And who do you think you are, barging in here? This is a private event. I am Eleanor Morton. Call security." My father gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Your security works for a company I own. They will not be responding." He took another step forward. "I will ask again. Who touched my daughter?" He turned his head slightly. "For those of you in this room who are blissfully unaware, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Robert Sterling." A collective, audible gasp went through the room. The name Sterling was legend. It was a name that opened every door and ended every argument. Leo's face, I saw, had gone from pale to a ghostly white. He looked like he was going to be sick. The color drained from Eleanor's face as well. The triumphant smirk she had worn just minutes ago was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. "And that young woman," my father continued, gesturing toward me, "the one you humiliated and assaulted, is Mia Sterling. My daughter. My only heir." The shock in the room was palpable. It was a physical thing, a wave of disbelief and terror. Chloe dropped her phone, which clattered onto the marble floor. Richard Morton looked like he had been struck by lightning. "You accused my daughter of theft," my father said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more menace than any shout. "You accused a Sterling of stealing a trinket." He snapped his fingers. One of the men in suits stepped forward with a tablet and connected it to the large screens that had been displaying a slideshow of the Morton family throughout the party. "Let's review the evidence, shall we?" my father said. On the screens, high-definition security footage from the upstairs hallway and dressing room began to play. It was time-stamped. It clearly showed Chloe, earlier in the evening, entering her mother's dressing room alone. It showed her carefully lifting the sapphire necklace from its box and slipping it into her own clutch. Then it showed her going into my room, taking a cheap replica necklace from her pocket and hiding it deep inside the lining of my purse. The conspiracy was laid bare for all to see. The setup was undeniable. Chloe let out a small, strangled cry. Eleanor stared at the screen, her mouth agape. My father was not finished. He turned his cold, furious gaze upon Richard Morton. "Richard," he said, the name sounding like an insult. "Your company, Morton Investments, has been performing quite poorly for years. What you have told no one is that 6 years ago, to avoid bankruptcy, you sold a 60% controlling interest to a blind holding company based in Zurich. That holding company was me." Richard swayed on his feet, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "As the majority shareholder," my father continued, his voice relentless, "I called an emergency board meeting via teleconference 15 minutes ago. Your entire board of directors has been dismissed. Your position as chief executive officer has been terminated, effective immediately. All company assets have been frozen, pending a full forensic audit, which I assure you will uncover decades of mismanagement. You are ruined." He then turned to Eleanor, whose entire body was trembling. "This beautiful estate," he said, gesturing around the opulent ballroom. "It is a magnificent property. It is also mortgaged to the hilt. You have leveraged it against loans from 3 different banks to maintain your lavish lifestyle. As of this morning, I acquired all 3 of those banks. The loans have been called in. You are in default. You and your family have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Finally, his icy gaze fell upon Chloe, who was now openly weeping. "Your trust fund, my dear, was managed by a boutique investment firm. A firm whose parent company I bought last Tuesday in a private deal. Your portfolio manager was instructed by my office 10 minutes ago to liquidate all your assets to cover penalties for financial malfeasance we have just discovered. The fund no longer exists. The car you drive is leased by your father's now defunct company. The credit cards in your wallet were canceled 5 minutes ago." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon them, a death sentence delivered in a calm, businesslike tone. "You came after my daughter," he said, his voice a low growl. "You harmed the only thing in this world that I value. In less than 20 minutes, I have taken everything from you. Your company, your home, your money. And as you can see," he said, gesturing to the horrified faces of their friends who were already backing away from them, "your good name. You have nothing." In the stunned silence that followed, Leo finally moved. He rushed toward me, his face a desperate, pleading mess. "Mia," he gasped, reaching for my hands. "Mia, I am so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I had no idea who your father was. Please, we can fix this. I love you." I looked at him. At this weak, pathetic man. The love I had felt for him had curdled into a cold, hard pity. I pulled my hands from his grasp. I stood up straight, the borrowed cashmere coat feeling like armor. For the first time, I spoke, and my voice did not tremble. It was clear and strong. "No, Leo," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic apologies. "You are wrong. You did know. You knew they were cruel. You knew they were hurting me every single day for 2 years. You did not need to know my father's name to know that was wrong." I took a step closer, looking him directly in the eye. "This was never about my father's money. This was about your character. Tonight, you were given a choice. You could have stood with your family and their cruelty, or you could have stood with your wife and what was right. And you chose them. When I was on that floor, broken and humiliated, I looked at you. I begged you with my eyes. And you turned your back on me." Tears welled in his eyes. "Please, Mia. Don't do this. You didn't fail a test of my family's influence, I told him, my voice ringing with a finality that he could not mistake. You failed a test of basic human decency. You are a coward, Leo. And I am done with you. I took the wedding ring from my finger, the one he had placed there with so many promises, and I let it fall to the marble floor. It landed with a small, metallic click that sounded like a final judgment. I turned away from him, from his family, from the wreckage of my old life, and I walked toward my father. He put his arm around me, and together, we walked out of that ballroom, leaving behind the ruins of the Morton dynasty. 6 months passed. The downfall of the Mortons was swift and brutal, a piece of city gossip that burned brightly for a week and then faded. I saw a picture of Richard online once, working as a greeter at a big box store, his face hollow and defeated. A friend mentioned seeing Eleanor in a small, run-down apartment building on the wrong side of town, arguing with a landlord over a late rent payment. And Chloe, the glamorous Chloe, was spotted working as a barista, her face permanently etched with a bitter resentment. Their high society friends, the ones who had laughed at my humiliation, had abandoned them the moment the money disappeared. They were social lepers. I, on the other hand, was rising. I did not return to my old life of idle luxury. I could not. I had been changed. I took a position as the vice president of the Sterling Foundation, my father's philanthropic arm. I completely overhauled its mission. We began to focus on creating scholarships and support networks for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, for those who had been underestimated, abused, and cast aside. I found a purpose that filled me with a strength I never knew I possessed. It was a power that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with making a difference. One afternoon, I was walking back to my office from a lunch meeting when I saw her. It was Eleanor. She was carrying a thin grocery bag, and she looked a decade older. Her clothes were worn, her hair was unkempt. She saw me at the same time I saw her. Fear and shame flickered across her face, and she tried to turn away, to blend into the crowd. I walked toward her. She flinched as I approached, as if expecting a blow or a cruel word. I stopped in front of her. She would not meet my eyes. "I forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I want you to know that," I continued, "I am not forgiving you for your sake. I am doing it for mine. I will not be defined by what you did to me. I will not carry your hatred in my heart. It is a weight I no longer wish to bear. I release it." I saw a single tear trace a path through the grime on her cheek. She said nothing. I turned and walked away, feeling a final, profound sense of peace settle over me. I was truly free. They thought they could break me that night. They thought that by tearing my dress, by throwing me to the floor, they could destroy me. But all they did was tear away the facade. They revealed who they were, and in doing so, they showed me who I could be. They stripped me of a weak love so that I could find my own strength. True strength is not about the name you carry, the clothes you wear, or the balance in your bank account. It is about the dignity you hold inside, the quiet resilience that refuses to be extinguished by the cruelty of others. They wanted to see me fall. They wanted me to suffer as they were suffering. But real revenge is not about stooping to their level. True revenge is about rising so high on your own terms that they become an insignificant speck below. It is about building a life so full of purpose and joy that their memory has no place to live. Remember that. Your worth is not determined by their judgment. It is not something that can be given to you or taken away. It is, and always will be, determined by you.